Dr. Marakialoha's pager shrieked just as the fluorescent lights of St. Gabriel's Medical Center flickered awake for the dawn shift. She had been on her feet for 29 hours, working through a code blue, a midnight appendectomy, and 6 hours of charting that felt like chiseling stone in the dark. A smear of cold coffee jittered in her veins, and she wondered, not for the first time that week, why her life felt like a corridor that only narrowed. When she finally flopped into her cramped call room, she saw the first crane, a tiny burst of paper sky blue sitting on her pillow. The wings were curved so perfectly that they cast shadows like miniature sails. Mara picked it up, certain this had to be a joke from an intern, but there was no note, only the silent, immaculate fold of the crane itself. She set it on the bedside table, fell onto the cot fully clothed, and dreamed of nothing at all. The next night, after another punishing shift, a second crane appeared in the medicine cabinet above the sink in the resident lounge. This one was made from a strip of faded newsprint, the text in Japanese. Mara's grandmother had folded cranes exactly this way, humming while the Honolulu sun crossed the veranda. A memory flitted past. The scent of plumeria, the soft rustle of old newspaper, and her grandmother's voice saying, "1,000 cranes for 1,000 wishes." Mara hadn't touched origami since the funeral 9 years ago. She slipped the fragile crane into her coat pocket and returned to rounds. On the third night, the hospital was a hive of static. Elevators dinging, oxygen pumps sighing, CT scanners buzzing. Mara had just finished telling a family in the ICU that their father might not make it through the night when she spotted the third crane perched on the railing outside the unit, balanced above the antiseptic floor like a feathered sentinel. This one was crimson, creased from what looked like a discarded EKG strip. On its wing, someone had written, "Come find the quiet." She held the bird in her palm, pulse hammering, and glanced down the hallway. Nothing but the blur of white coats and rolling gurneys. No prankster in sight. Still, something lured her, a tug in her chest that felt suspiciously like hope. Mara tucked the crimson crane next to the others on her desk and stared at them, while the hospital kept breathing around her. She realized she could not remember the last time she had thought of a wish. The fourth crane arrived, shoved under her windshield wiper at 2:30 a.m. as she trudged to the parking garage, lungs aching from recycled air. This one was pale green, folded from an OR checklist sheet. On its belly, a single arrow pointed back toward the stairwell. Mara sighed but followed it, driven less by curiosity than by a thrumming need to chase anything that wasn't a critical lab value. The stairwell felt like the hollow of a seashell, echoing each footstep. Halfway down, she found the fifth crane, a lavender one, nestled on the metal grate between the 6th and 5th floors. Beneath it lay a post-it that read, "The Heart Remembers, Floor 5, Pediatric Cardiology." Her pulse skipped. She hadn't rotated there in months. The cranes were becoming a breadcrumb trail, and Mara, exhausted bird that she was, followed. Pediatric cardiology was quiet. Lights dimmed to lunar dusk. Monitors glowed above tiny beds. In room 512, a little boy named Isaiah had been waiting weeks for a donor heart. Mara remembered admitting him last January, shell-shocked parents in tow. A cuffed teddy bear sat vigil by his pillow. By his vent, someone had taped a paper crane identical to Mara's, chalk white, wings outstretched. The child slept, fingers curled like tendrils. Mara rested a hand on the rail, guilt rippling through her. She'd been too streamlined, too mechanical in her care, collapsing warmth into protocols. A nurse approached, whispering, "Dr. Kealoha, it comforts him. Says the cranes keep bad dreams away." Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something brave, something doctorly, but all she managed was, "They're beautiful." She slipped away before her pager could remind her of another task. In her coat pocket, the lavender crane fluttered as if alive. By the end of the week, the cranes multiplied. One appeared tucked in the spine of her pharmacology manual, cobalt cross-hatched with medication doses she had scribbled during residency. Another waited inside the vending machine coil, guarding her packet of stale pretzels. That one was saffron yellow, from a nutrition facts label. Each crane bore a word or phrase, tiny mantras that landed like gentle taps on her conscience. Slow down. Listen. You are here. Mara lined them along her apartment windowsill like a regiment of pastel sentries. Night after night she interrogated them. Who was sending them? Why her? She considered suspects. Dr. Green, the jovial cardiologist who believed in guerrilla kindness. Nurse Patel, whose origami swans decorated the nurses' station during Christmas. Even her younger sister Lena, a social worker with a flair for mischief. But nothing fit. The cranes appeared when no one should have known where Mara would be next, like they had a private map of her fatigue. Then came the Sunday marathon shift. A multi-car pileup on the H1 freeway drenched the ER in blood and diesel. Mara worked triage until her shoulders buzzed. She closed 4 chest tubes, intubated 3 patients, cracked a ribcage in Trauma Bay 2, and delivered a stillborn in the hallway when no rooms were left. At dawn, she left the trauma ward empty, scraped raw of empathy. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Rooftop. Bring the cranes. Mara's first instinct was to ignore it. The second was to delete it. The third, strongest, was to obey. She loaded the tiny paper flock into a shoebox, took the service elevator, and emerged onto the rooftop helipad where the ocean winked in pewter morning light. Wind tugged at her scrubs. By the safety rail, a semicircle of cranes, at least 50, waited, their colors a thunderous mosaic against the concrete. In the midst lay the final crane, folded from unbleached surgical gauze wrap, wings spread wider than her palm. She knelt and lifted it. The paper felt warm, sun-kissed. Inside, instead of a note, there was a photograph. Mara at age 8, gap-toothed and gleeful, hugging her grandmother in front of a pop-up community clinic on Oahu's North Shore. She hadn't seen that image in years. She wasn't even sure it still existed. On the back, someone had written in ink the same blue as hospital scrubs. Remember this promise? Memory crashed over her like surf. Her grandmother's hands guiding hers, saying, "Medicine is service, not sacrifice. You will heal by standing beside, not above." Mara had chosen surgery because cutting felt like certainty. You could fix with a swift incision, sew, close. Yet along the way, she had traded the vow for endurance. Keep patients alive, keep yourself moving, keep the paperwork clean. She stood trembling amid the cranes and realized whoever orchestrated this knew her more intimately than any colleague. Or maybe, she thought, the cranes themselves were the knowing. Still, she needed an answer. She turned and finally saw him. Isaiah's father, Solomon, stepped from behind the flight mast, holding a small toolbox, cheeks windburned. "I hoped you'd come." Mara blinked. "You? How?" He gestured at the cranes. "Isaiah and I fold them. Well, mostly me lately. He shows me how." He smiled, tired but alive. "Your grandmother used to volunteer at our church. She taught origami classes when I was a kid. I kept folding. Years later, I recognized your name on your badge during rounds. You saved my boy twice already. But I saw how hard you looked at the floor instead of his eyes." Mara flushed, defensive. It's been busy." "I know." He crouched beside a cluster of indigo birds. "I watched you after each shift. Your shoulders looked like they carried a mountain. I thought maybe the cranes could guide you the way they guided Isaiah when he was scared. They're maps of patience, Dr. Kealoha. They tell the hands to slow so the mind can breathe. Mara's vision blurred. You could have just talked to me. I tried, several times. You never stopped moving. He opened the toolbox, revealing more cranes, tight as shells. I figured paper might slip through cracks words couldn't. Wind rifled their hair. In the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. Mara exhaled soundlessly. She felt as though the hospital walls below were made of her own clenched muscles, and the cranes were dismantling them one fold at a time. Isaiah's waiting for a heart, she whispered, ashamed at the obviousness. And you're waiting for yours, Solomon replied gently. A helicopter approached, rotors chopping the sunrise, broadcasting gusts. An organ transport, Mara assumed. She checked her pager, no alert yet. The chopper descended, metal bird echoing the silent paper ones scattered around them. And Mara tasted electricity. Someone's heart inside that cool box, someone's chance. The pilot hopped out and signaled to the transplant team appearing through the stairwell door. Mara's attending, Dr. Mortensen, brushed past. Kealoha, good, you're here. Heart en route to PEDS OR. Your first assist. Mara glanced at Solomon, then at the cranes trembling in the rotor wash. She felt her grandmother's voice braid with Solomon's. Stand beside, not above. A hush opened inside her, wide enough for choice. Give me 5 minutes, she told Mortensen. The attending frowned but nodded, preoccupied with signatures and ice packs. Mara turned back to Solomon. Will you keep folding? He'll need them during recovery. Solomon's eyes shone. 1,000 cranes, 1,000 wishes. She scooped 2 handfuls of cranes into her pockets, feeling their corners press through the fabric like talismans. Before heading to scrub in, she sent a text to her sister. Need help restarting free weekend clinic Nana loved. Let's talk. The message felt daring, like unlocking a window. In the OR, as the donor heart was sewn to Isaiah's vessels, Mara moved with deliberate grace. Her hands, which had lately behaved like frantic birds, now mimicked the stillness of folded wings, poised yet restful. She listened to the lull between beeps, honored each suture knot as though it were a blessing. When the new heart finally hiccuped and surged into rhythm, every monitor sang. Around the table, a hush of collective awe settled, and someone, maybe Mara herself, released a breath that sounded like thank you. Hours later, while Isaiah was wheeled to the ICU, Mara placed a sky-blue crane, the first one she'd received, on the pillow beside him. She traced its wingtip. Guard him, she murmured. And guard me, too. 2 weeks passed. The cranes stopped appearing at random, but they continued multiplying in targeted places. A basket in pediatrics, the chapel, the staff garden. Nurses and patients began folding them as if the impulse were contagious. A jar labeled Wishes and Worries sat at reception, stuffed with cranes that visitors crafted while waiting for news. Even Dr. Mortensen, stoic as bedrock, was spotted slipping a silver origami bird into his pocket. Mara herself carried a few cranes on rounds and offered them to anxious families, showing them how a plain sheet of consent form could become something buoyant. She discovered that fingers learning a fold forgot, even for a minute, to clench in fear. Each session felt like thread stitching her back to the human fabric she'd thought medicine had frayed beyond repair. One Friday evening, after discharge paperwork for Isaiah, walking the corridor, new heart thumping like a drum, Mara clocked out early for the first time in months. She went to the beach where her grandmother's ashes had been scattered, a place she had avoided because grief there was as big as the Pacific. She sat on the sand, salt cool on her ankles, and unfurled a blank square of rice paper. The horizon pulsed coral and gold. The sea inhaled and exhaled like a patient riding a ventilator, alive because someone believed breath mattered. Mara folded slowly, valley fold, mountain fold, squash. With every crease, she named a promise aloud. I will look people in the eye. I will not confuse efficiency with caring. I will let quiet speak. The crane emerged under her fingertips, the thousandth maybe, yet utterly new. She set it on the water, watched it bob among the foam, and realized the cranes had never been only messages from someone else. They were a dialogue between what hurt and what healed within her. Her phone buzzed. Lena, count me in. Let's bring back Nana's clinic. Mara smiled. She imagined a future of Saturday mornings under a tin roof, free immunizations, blood pressure checks, children coloring while adults folded paper birds. She could still be a surgeon, still wield the scalpel with purpose, but she wouldn't let the metal harden her. She would weave paper into the steel. Back at St. Gabriel's, an intern discovered an origami crane on his pillow after his own first grueling overnight. It was saffron yellow, wings wide, bearing 2 words in careful handwriting, "Stay human." He glanced around, but the hallway was empty. Down the corridor, Dr. Mara Kealoha walked toward the stairs, coat pockets rustling softly, as though filled with the quiet flutter of liberated hearts.